There we go. All right, the recording is in progress. Welcome everyone today. I'm Genna Fasullo LaPeer, and I'm here with Amber Zeuner, and we are two attorneys here at the Miller Elder Law Firm. And today we are talking about types of Medicaid as it pertains to what we see in the elder law world. Kind of general housekeeping. We're going to try to go through about 45 minutes of information. We are going to take questions and answers at the end, so please feel free to put that in for your questions when we get to that point. You can do it as we go. If there's something that you want to ask and you don't want to forget about it, into the Q&A section of the Zoom, of the webinar box. I had mentioned that we're going to be recording this. It'll be emailed out at the end and available on our YouTube channel. So let's jump into it. So what are we here to talk about?
Yeah, so we're here to talk about types of prevalent Medicaid that we see and often use here in Florida, especially in the elder law community. And that really comes down to two different types. We've got long-term care Medicaid, and we have home and community-based Medicaid services that can be provided. Now, of those two types, I do want to go into a little bit of the general qualifications for both of these, and then we're going to delve a little more into them throughout the webinar today. So generally speaking, a couple of the main requirements: 65 years of age and older, or disabled or blind as defined under the Social Security Code, a U.S. citizen or green card holder, and then there's a couple of financial requirements as well. So the big one, usually the question we get a lot about, is assets, what the assets can be like. And there is an asset limit, a resource limit of $2,000 for both of these programs, and an income limit as well. And that, as of 2024, is actually $2,829 that you can get. Important to note, that is gross, not net. So just keep that in mind as we go as well.
So those kind of baseline qualifications we'll sort of refer back to, because they really are a component of either type of Medicaid that we're applying for, again, as it pertains to those in the elder law community. Now, there are, beyond what we're discussing today, many other types of Medicaid that apply in a lot of different settings. We're not going to touch on those. So this is long-term care Medicaid, so facility-based, and then long-term care waiver. So some facilities do take the waiver, and then it's also the home and community-based services, if you're qualified, to see how many hours, if you qualify for any of services in the home. And we're just having a freezing moment. Hopefully our video is going to turn back on and we're going to be absolutely okay. So just a second here. There it goes. It's coming back on. Hopefully you guys can still see it, hear us. Let's try one more time. We're going to start our video and restop it. I don't see any video that's actually working here.
Let me go ahead, and if you want to continue on, I think we're still able to be heard. I see the microphone moving. I'm going to go get with our administrator to see if we can get that video back.
All right, sounds good. I'm going to keep going here. All right, no, is it working? I don't see it working at all. Okay, perfect. Well, all right, I do see that the video or the microphone is still moving, so I am going to go ahead and just kind of continue on. So I'm going to start a little bit about home and community-based services, or the long-term care waiver is what we often refer to it as. The long-term care Medicaid waiver program are for those who only or would require assisted living or ALF level of care, or they're able to reside at home and would benefit from some level of home care. But this definitely is a needs-based, priority-given waiver program. Not everybody that applies gets it. Not everybody that applies will qualify. And I will get into a little bit about what is that priority and what is that. I'm going to actually just stop for a second because we're trying to see if we can get this video going. So just one brief moment. Bear with us a moment, guys. We're just about got this video set back up. All right, we are back up and running. There's always, it's never going to be a webinar series if there isn't a technical difficulty at some point. So thanks for bearing with us. So let me just go back to the beginning and recap. So I'm going to be talking about just briefly home and community-based long-term care Medicaid waiver, Medicaid that is applied for. So it's either going to be, it's going to be a priority-based, need-based grant. So an assessment of who needs it, what their level of care is. So we're talking like basically like assisted living, skilled nursing level of care, or we have that care that can be provided for in the home, but it's going to be the people that need it the most that get it. So even if we are able to have, we are under asset limit and we are within income limits, and we even get screened and we're put on the wait list, unless somebody's going to score. Usually it's a scale of 1 to 7, a 5 or higher. Typically they're going to be on a wait list for some time, like 2 years or more. So we'll talk a little bit about more breaking down what that level of care means and how to get off the wait list and how we work with people on that. So what kind of care are we actually talking about that is even provided through the Medicaid long-term care waiver? So we've got to also remind ourselves that there's 2 different types of Medicaid facilities. Let's talk facility-based for just a second. So within a facility, like on the facility spectrum, there's going to be long-term care Medicaid beds, and Amber will talk more about that qualification after. But there are also Medicaid waiver beds. And in that situation, typically Medicaid waiver, if you apply and if you get off the wait list, it's usually an award of up to $1,400 or $1,500. It does not cover room and board. It typically only goes towards the medical portion of the applicant's need. If they are, and when you're in these kind of facilities, like a facility is going to tell you, yes, we have long-term care Medicaid beds. No, we don't. Or we have long-term care med waiver beds. So it's do your research on the facility, because not all facilities are alike. Not all facilities accept the same types of Medicaid. So it's very important to either connect with an elder care coordinator or an elder law attorney that kind of has a take on where are the best facilities and what kind of Medicaid is taken in each of these facilities. So when we are talking, because this is so often what people come and say, we want to stay at home the longest. And, that's the desire of all. So if you want to stay at home and we have a really, really high need, high priority, meaning that there is a high level of care required and it's a little bit of a crisis. There's not a lot of helpers, and we can demonstrate that to Medicaid, then sometimes, depending on need, we can get an award of between 15 and up to 40 hours of services, again, based on need. So money is provided for those 15 to 40 hours, and it can either be through a Medicaid-based agency, or it can be through the participant-directed option to actually have in-home care. So again, it doesn't cover everything. You really have to be high level. And when you're at home, that high level of care need, along with lack of helpers, caregivers, whatever that are available to assist,
that's really going to bump you up on or bump you up on the scale to get off of the wait list. So let's talk a little bit about that screening process and that wait list. So the first thing to do is, well, first of all, you're going to have to determine where you want to be here. So is this going to be a situation that we're looking for a Medicaid facility that takes Medicaid waiver, or is this going to be a home and community-based services med waiver? Either way, the first thing you need to identify is the local agency for Aging and Disability Resource Center. Every county in Florida has one. So your first order of priority is going to be go locate that resource center. And the first thing that resource center is going to do is they're going to set up a phone assessment. And that phone assessment is really where they're going to start doing a 701S interview. Now that interview is going to be a needs-based interview. This is where you're going to preliminarily have somebody fall on the ranking scale. So, I mean, we have this where families come in and we're discussing along with our elder care coordinators, like what are the goals here? How are things happening at home? What kind of care does this individual need? And, you know, everybody wants to basically be able to answer that question in the best light. So, you know, I assist with, you know, I can lay out her clothes or his clothes, but he can get dressed or she can get dressed.
I can prep a meal for him,
correct.
but he can eat himself.
Right. So on these 701 interview questions, you 100% have to tell the truth and not exaggerate. But our one very strict piece of guidance is do not downplay the level of care that is required on the day-to-day. Being a caregiver is an extremely burdensome, you know, noble but burdensome job, really. So we want to make sure that the picture that is happening on a day-to-day basis for the person and the caregiver is being accurately portrayed to that Aging and Disability Resource Center interviewee. So for us, when we have somebody doing a Medicaid waiver application, our elder care coordinators actually work a little bit with the family, and really, it's not about coaching, it's about teasing out the accurate details of what is going on day to day so that that can be the most accurate depiction of what is needed for this person on any given day. Again, you have to remember priority on the wait list goes to those with the greatest need, bottom line. Let's talk a little bit about, say you do the interview now, you get a score, usually again, 1 to 7, 5 or higher typically comes off the wait list faster. Now, reminders that how they're being scored and how long the wait list is definitely going to be a county driven thing. So every county in Florida may have a little bit of differences, you know, based on who is applying and how many people are applying. So that's just something else to remember. So, okay, we've done the 701S interview. We are on the wait list. Now what? Well, we wait, but in the waiting period for our purposes, that's when we as elder law attorneys start working with the families to do some Medicaid planning. Now, what the heck does that mean? That means that we're going to look at income, we're going to look at asset, because remember, along with all of those Social Security and common things that we need to have as a baseline qualification for Medicaid, there is always going to be that financial assessment and component. $2,000 in countable assets, $2,089 in income limit for at least for 2024, and it does change. So you always have to make sure you're working with somebody that is up to date on what is going on and what the qualifications are for each year. So the wait list is Medicaid planning time. So we are going to break down the income limit. We're going to break down assets. We're going to look at what the countable assets are. And then we're going to look for ethical, legal, lawful ways to where to put money so that there are strategies short of total liquidation and impoverishment, because that also could be a disqualification if you're just trying to liquidate assets and apply for Medicaid. So it's a very careful process. You definitely want to be sure you're working with somebody that understands that process, because you can walk away from that process very successful in terms of how you're going, where you're going to put your assets, and if there are going to be assets left over at the end of your life for your beneficiaries. Or if you have a spouse, how do we maintain the community spouse or the well spouse's standard of living? And we're going to talk a little bit more about that after. And I will also want to reference back to some of our prior webinars, because some of those prior webinars have gone deeper into detail with regard to the exact Medicaid planning process. Let's see what else we've got here that I need to cover. Okay, so, one last thing I want on while you're on the wait list. If you are on the wait list, yes, time to do your Medicaid plan and get your ducks in a row, but also super, super important. If there is a change in the level of care while you are on the wait list, always, always, always ask for a new assessment. If there is an increase in the level of care, if there is a crisis event that has occurred, if a caregiver has fallen ill, any of these things can trigger a different level of assessment. So if you're on the wait list and something occurs, always remember that you're not stuck with what happened on the first assessment. I mean, you don't want to be calling them every other week saying, please, please, please change my assessment. But if there is truly a reason that the level of care has increased or the level of need has increased, then you definitely want to make sure you have a new assessment done. We actually just did that with somebody, I think within the last couple of weeks, and they successfully came off the wait list as a result of their new need and new score. So something to keep in mind. Okay, finally, so you get off the wait list, you get the call. Fabulous. What happens next? So once your name is called off the wait list, the eventual Medicaid applicant is assigned a Medicaid benefits counselor. Now I'm reading this because I never remember the acronym. So a CARES home visit is going to be set up. And what the heck does CARES stand for? Comprehensive Assessment and Review for Long-Term Care Service. There you go. So they're going to come out, they're going to meet with you, they're going to basically figure out how many hours are required and what kind of care is required. And in conjunction with that, you will need a doctor to sign a Form 3008, which is valid for 1 year at a time, to certify that medical need. So that is kind of the long-term care waiver home and community-based service approach. Now I'm going to ask Amber to kind of take us through facility-based. So now we're moving into a facility must take Medicaid, number one, and that Medicaid is long-term care Medicaid only. So if we have that situation, what do we do about that? And what does that mean?
Yeah, so this is more commonly the type of Medicaid we're thinking about when we think Medicaid services. We're thinking about going into a facility to help provide those long-term care needs that someone cannot meet at home anymore and doesn't have the assistance for. So similar to the Medicaid waiver and what we talked about earlier, the same general qualifications are going to apply, on top of the financial qualifications. However, one of the main differences is with the facility long-term care Medicaid, you have to have a bed. And one of the sayings that we use for this is you have to have your butt in a bed, basically, when you apply. Because you have a window of 45 days in order to apply and have a application approved. And if you apply in that month is covered. So generally we say butt in bed for an application.
Now let me ask you one question. Yeah. What is the difference in terms of Medicaid waiver versus Medicaid long-term care? Is it
perfect? And that's exactly where I was going to move into next, which is where Genna was saying Medicaid waiver, you go on a wait list, it's based off of need of care. Medicaid long-term care is actually an entitlement. So
yes.
If you qualify and apply for Medicaid and you meet the levels of need and criteria to get approved for Medicaid, you will receive services under long-term care Medicaid. Now, how do you get there though? What does that look like? As Genna also previously said, it is county specific in these instances, but there are 5 activities of daily living you want to generally look at. And those are, can you feed yourself, transfer yourself, bathe yourself, go to the bathroom by yourself, and just general mobility. And the key here is going to be without assistance. Can you do these things on your own? So,
Mhm.
and I think I made this example a moment ago, but making, eating isn't as simple as just, can you take a fork and put it into your food and bring it to your mouth? You have to go to the store, grocery shop, come home, prep a meal in order to then eat it. And that is the entire process for that activity
Operate
of daily living.
appliances.
Operate appliances. Can you turn on the stove? Will you turn the stove off and not forget it? So when we're talking about these activities of daily living, it really is, can you do these activities on your own without assistance? In order to qualify for Medicaid long-term care services. And then and I think we said what the difference is. If you do qualify under, the needs in your county for Medicaid long-term care, it is an entitlement. So you will actually receive those benefits so long as you have your butt in a bed. Now, a couple items I do want to talk about moving into long-term care Medicaid, though, that are different and distinguish it from Medicaid waiver is Medicaid will cover all of your services if you are qualified and receive Medicaid long-term care services in a facility. That said, we do still have the income and asset and financial matters that we want to talk about and make sure we address, because there are, as in our previous webinars, we've talked about a number of ways to take care of that the appropriate way. But one of the big differences is, if you say you still could not privately pay for a facility, but you qualify for Medicaid long-term care services, you will get a small allowance. It's about $160 monthly to keep, but the rest of your income goes towards the patient's responsibility. And they then, Medicaid, will jump in and pay the difference. So this is a really good program for those who qualify for the benefits of it. That qualification process, though, is a little different when we have a spouse, per se, because we have, on top of the number of options we've talked about on Medicaid planning that we've talked about on our webinars, having a community spouse is another factor into Medicaid qualification because it changes those financial requirements a little bit.
Let me break down community spouse, because in all honesty, when I very first started doing this, I'm like, what is this community spouse?
Yeah.
So what the heck are we talking about? We're talking about husband and wife. Let's just say husband has been diagnosed with dementia. He is now in severe or end stage and needs a facility. Wife is otherwise well and able to live in their home and, go to the grocery store and be completely independent. So what do? So we call, you have your Medicaid applicant, the sick spouse, and you have your well spouse or the community spouse. So when we talk community spouse, that's what we keep saying, the well spouse in the community.
Yeah, who still has to go about maintaining their life as well. Although, and here's where we go into the general qualifications, do they also have to follow the same rules for $2,000 under assets and income? And that's where it gets a little different. With a community spouse, there's actually an allowance to have some assets outside of the sick spouse. So you can transfer some assets over up to a certain limit without penalty for that. But one of the bigger concerns we have sometimes is income. You have enough income to not qualify for Medicaid, but you have too much to pay privately. So one of the options there actually is to transfer that income from our sick spouse to our well spouse, who can then maintain some of that income to pay household bills if they have a mortgage, utilities, things that are not going to be removed just because our sick spouse now needs additional assistance.
What do you call that?
We call that a court-ordered support. And as it sounds, you have to get a court order for it. And the process to go into that, it gets really technical, but essentially there's a determination where how much you have for expenses that overexceed versus how much income your spouse makes and how much we can transfer over to you. And then that is your income to help provide for the household and yourself and the community as the well spouse. And really, that is a wonderful tool, though, on top of a number of others that we can do with a community spouse to help get long-term care services for a sick spouse who needs to go into a facility and can't stay at home anymore. And then this way we can take care of both of them rather than having to impoverish the spouse who still has to, take care of the house and the bills.
So without going too deep on the
Yeah.
technicalities of Medicaid planning, what are some of the exempt or non-countable assets for the purposes of Medicaid?
Yeah, so the big ones that usually come up in questions are your home. Everyone wants to know if their home is going to be subject to Medicaid. Homesteads are actually exempt in Florida, which is wonderful news that we get to share in these cases, as well as IRAs, so retirement accounts. If you have retirement accounts, so long as you're taking your required minimum distributions on a regular basis and you haven't taken extra withdrawals, don't touch them. Let them sit.
Yes, great advice.
Smaller areas there though are, a vehicle for transportation, burial arrangements. If you go ahead and make that ahead of time, up to $2,500, you can do that as well. And irrevocable funeral policy as well, to go ahead and set that up and have that in place. So these are all just some of the ways we can take care of these expenses later on without putting it onto your children or whoever's going to be doing it after the fact, and still get you qualified for Medicaid.
Right. So, and then, from there, there's like a whole other level. Then we end up talking rental income producing property. Can we title your home? That is exempt in an enhanced life estate deed. Is there a need for a personal services contract? The only
What the
other,
hell even is that?
well, yeah, and I'll refer to you to the other
The other
webinar
videos.
because that's gonna be another 25 minutes of an explanation. But I think the point is all of these things, so whether you're looking at the Medicaid waiver or the Medicaid long-term care, those general qualifications are always going to exist, and utilizing some of these tools and puzzling it together is what makes for a successful Medicaid application. I would say as a general thing, when you've got a well spouse or the community spouse that exists, that Medicaid planning is 100% achievable and attainable. It's probably just a little bit more complicated, so even more reason to engage a professional to help you with that. But it is possible. So on that note, what are some of the things to look for when you're choosing a Medicaid planning attorney? So first of all, you definitely want an attorney to assist you with the Medicaid planning. And there's, many people that can do many things, but not all the things include Medicaid planning. So if this is something on the horizon for you and your family, you really want to make sure you're choosing an individual that is quite skilled in this area, because it can be very complicated and you want to have that successful application the first time. Okay, so we've kind of bullet pointed 5 different things that we can kind of tease through and look for when looking for a professional to assist you. So the first one is, do the professional, understand that we do not in Florida require divorce or impoverishment of the community spouse? And we've talked a little bit about that. It is important to note that although Medicaid is a federally funded program, it is administered by the states. So oftentimes people come and they're saying, well, I read that this, that, or the other. And we end up saying, well, that sounds like it's a source from New York or Virginia or somewhere else. And in Florida, just like other elder laws, not elder law attorneys, but like actual statutes, some of our legislation in Florida is very unique. And that is no different than when it comes down to Medicaid planning. We are unique, we are different. And actually, we're very fortunate in a lot of ways, because a lot of other states can't do Medicaid planning the way that we do. So the first thing is, if all you hear is you have to divorce or impoverish your spouse for the sick spouse to get Medicaid, red flag.
First one.
First one, yeah. The next one is, and this really kind of speaks to the differences in states. So if you hear, do they immediately recommend a Medicaid trust, which will require a 5-year look back before the application, you may want to look elsewhere. Why? In Florida, we actually do not need to set up a Medicaid trust. We are able to employ these other tools, as we referenced in our prior Medicaid planning webinars, to actually get somebody qualified immediately. Everybody is subject to the 5-year look back for Medicaid. They don't want to see a liquidation of assets, but is the only way to do that and qualify is to shepherd everything into a Medicaid trust? No, that's not true in Florida. I believe in some other states, for example, New York, that is a thing, and that is something that needs to be dealt with ahead of time.
And it's one of the only ways in those other states.
Right. But for us, if we typically want to say every, when you're going into a facility, or shortly thereafter, like we're talking like 4 to 6 weeks kind of thing, that's when we really need to employ these Medicaid planning strategies. We're not doing it 5 years in advance. We want an accurate snapshot of resources, assets, income right before we go into the application process. And as Amber had indicated, we need at least for the long-term care Medicaid, we need a butt in a bed before we're going to even make that application. So we're definitely not wanting to do planning 5 years out, at least in the state of Florida. Okay, what else do you want to look for when hiring a professional? Do they talk about things like personal services contracts, sheltering retirement assets, and what assets are exempt under Florida's rules? So we kind of touched a little bit about that. So rental income producing property is a big one. Personal services contracts are a big one. So are there strategies offered other than, pour all your money into different things on your house and basically just doing a spend down? There are other ways to do this. 4, in situations where you do have a spouse, again, this is where the little bit more complicated Medicaid planning comes in. Does the attorney recommend things like a single payer annuity? Or as Amber said, court-ordered support strategies. Those are very unique and interesting tools. So the single payer annuity, we often employ. It works fabulously when we have a community spouse. But again, we want to make sure that the Medicaid planner has understanding of these tools, but not just an understanding of them, but more importantly, when and where they apply and how to use them. Because you can employ some of these strategies and perhaps they're not the most effective one. I always use the jigsaw puzzle analogy. It is absolutely looking at the tools that we have in Florida, the situation of the applicant coming to us and their family circumstances, and basically putting together a complete jigsaw puzzle of how these best fit together. And honestly, it is quite complicated. Not impossible, it's very effective, but you definitely have to have an eye and an understanding for exactly how these tools work. All right, so finally, does the attorney understand the ability to use pooled trusts or special needs trusts to create asset resource when someone is on Medicaid? So again, those are 2 more planning tools that are only going to apply in very specific circumstances, but are available to us in Florida if we need them. So that is, I think, like the overarching message is when it comes to the types of Medicaid we're dealing with in the elder law world, it's going to be long-term care waiver, which is either in facility on a med waiver or at home and community based, priority based, not an entitlement. Then we've got Medicaid long-term care that is an entitlement. We have to have a butt in a bed before placement and application, and that will cover at 100%. And then at baseline, some people do say, I'm going to spend down my assets and I'm not even anywhere near income limit and I'm going to make an application. And sometimes that works, but oftentimes it doesn't. More often than not, it doesn't. And that the person helping you along in either one of those strategies really needs to take a comprehensive approach, because the other thing to bear in mind, there is all this other Medicaid planning stuff, but we also want to ensure that we've got a good durable power of attorney in place. We've got a good healthcare surrogate in place, and that is going to also be dependent on the capacity that we have coming to us of the people. So if somebody doesn't have testamentary capacity, but they have a durable power of attorney that was previously in place, that can work. But if they are at the point that they still have testamentary capacity, we really want to make sure that they have good documents in place, because otherwise that's going to make the Medicaid planning a lot harder. And if they're going into a facility, you really want to make sure you empower your agents and your trusted helper with the ability to actually help you. Because we don't want to end, what we always want to try to avoid, we try to do probate avoidance planning, depending on what we're trying to achieve. But we also want to avoid guardianship if we can. Guardianships are wonderful tools in Florida, and they help a lot of people, and they're necessary in a lot of instances. But if we can plan with really solid documents up front, if we have that ability, then we really want to make sure we're doing that. So I think on that note, I'm going to open the floor to some questions. I see there's one already in the queue here, but please feel free to drop your questions into the question and answer box. I think we've actually answered this one, but Amber?
Yeah, so the first question is that income per month? And yes, it is monthly income, but you want to make sure you're looking at your gross income. So not just what comes into your account, but what you're actually getting before deductions, because that is what is going to count.
And the other issue is sometimes, the situation is the gross income coming into that you're getting is can be under the 2089. However, if you go like 6 months and the $1,000 a month end up parlaying itself into $4,000 a month, you're going to be disqualified from your Medicaid application. So that is another aspect of planning that we also need to take into consideration, because if somebody's going to go in and get most of their services covered, there is a patient responsibility portion that will be determined, but we also just need to make sure that even your allowance of $160 isn't going to multiply over the course of years into over $2,000. So we've got the income issue, and then we've got the asset issue that sometimes can work together.
And maintaining that, like Genna said, over time, Medicaid planning strategies in the beginning, we can get you set up and approved. But if that 160 just continually grows, then you have to make sure you're maintaining that through the process.
Yes, absolutely.
And just to say that number here again, because I know we've been referencing it, but that current 2024 income limit is 2829.
2829, yeah. And please be sure that you're looking at up-to-date numbers.
And it changes potentially every year, I'm pretty sure. So, as the time goes on for when it's appropriate for you and your family, just make sure to, consult with an elder law attorney who knows the current stats.
Okay, do you need to reapply each year? There is something that you have to file each year that doesn't necessarily mean you start from ground zero. If you have a disqualifying event, yes, you're going to have to fix that. There is something that you file to maintain your Medicaid status, but it is not starting from ground zero full application every single time.
Yeah.
All right. I don't see any other questions coming in at the moment. But as we said, this is absolutely going to be, it is recorded and it will be sent out via email. It'll be put on our YouTube channel. So feel free to reference that if you need to. And if there's no other questions right now, I think we can safely say we're going to wrap it up. And happy Wednesday to everybody.
Happy Wednesday.
And if there's anything that we can do to help, obviously, you know where to find us. We are Genna and Amber from the Miller Elder Law Firm. And we look forward to working with you or helping you, or we'll see you maybe next time on our webinar. All right. Bye-bye, everybody. Have a nice week.